Hi, everyone. I'm actually going to go ahead and start, and we'll let people join in as they get here. Uh, I did want to point out that there is a mini forest pilot happening in. I've heard about it in several different ways. This is the Green Communities Canada, and I'm using that picture just on the sidelines as part of our talk about greening grounds and greenbelts. We are with the Social and Ecological Justice Commission. My name is Esther Collier, and I am the chair of the Ecological Subcommittee with the Social and Ecological Justice Commission. And we have Kim and Celio. They are staff here with the commission, with the Shining Waters region, and they are also participate with the commission. And so they are also here to help out with our work today. So I want to talk that as you come, that we are thinking about the air, the soil, and the water as we work to increase the life. This symbol was created by me. Feel free to use it as just a way to let people know that you are participating in environmental concerns. When we think about the sustainability of the land, we recognize from the IPCC reports on climate that a sustainable future is going to have to be equitable and inclusive for all life forms. And so we're aware that this hasn't been what's happened in the past in Canada towards those who were Indigenous to this land. And for me, those are the Anishinaabeg Nations, the Huron-Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nation. And I think in our region, Shining Waters region, the Chippewas-Brahma First Nations are definitely a big part of that. And I'm aware that there are others in our region as well. And also that processes have occurred to uproot them. The Toronto Purchase, the Williams Treaties, and the Indian Act, of course, and many others, residential schooling. And we have to learn to think a lot about how our Indigenous peoples think, which is about how the land, the soil, and the water work together. And every time I do a land acknowledgement, I like to pick one of the nations around me and do a little research into them. And so I looked at the Chippewas-Brahma First Nation website this time and was really interested to hear what they say about themselves. And one of the things they said was, from the earliest of times, our people have been entrepreneurs, artisans, craftsmen, hunters, and fishermen. And we later operated as guides throughout the area for tourists and marketed crafts and produce. And this statement was very powerful and very relevant for what we're doing here, is that our ultimate goal is to protect the lands, resources, and water to ensure a healthy environment for this and future generations. And this stands alongside progressive programs, economic development initiatives, and member services. I'm also pointing out that the Rama Country Market is open from 6 to 11 p.m. daily. I think that's really great to know. Welcome to you. And Don, I don't think is here right now. I'm hoping he joins soon because I would love him to talk a little bit about the biodiversity crisis. But if he doesn't arrive, I will speak to that near the end of the presentation. So we'll be jumping ahead a little bit in time. And Margaret and France are here, and Erin, I think, will be coming in. And they're going to be speaking throughout this presentation, so they have time set aside for them on Greenbelt, on the Alliance for Livable Ontario. And then we have a large portion of the time which will be for networking, because it's that sharing of ideas back and forth that I think is really powerful about how to go forward. The General Council Executive adopted this strategic climate objective that to amplify and integrate initiatives in a bold and hopeful denominational climate strategy that accelerates reductions towards a goal of an 80% decrease in emissions by 2030. That commitment included a commitment to measure, report, and adjust based on learnings. And we've talked about data a bit here already this afternoon, but when this came out, the churches in the region were a little bit freaked out because that's a very large decrease in emissions by 2030. A lot of people are talking about a 50% or a 45% decrease. So they really stepped it up. I think it's actually greatly needed, but our churches are in many cases older buildings with older populations struggling to meet the economic issues. And it was really sort of a big, how can we possibly do that? And so part of the ecological subcommittee's goal is to try to support our faith communities as they do this. And one of the arguments that we're really making is this isn't just about your building. This is about your neighborhood. And so helping people understand about communicating with their neighbors about some of the issues is a lot of what we're doing. I was just presenting this morning too about the nature of the crisis. It is, we just heard this last week, that we have hit an all-time high for ocean temperatures. We also have heard that even the IPCC report, which is dire enough, there's somebody, a good scientist, arguing that it's James Hansen, who sort of started a lot of the climate work, is arguing that they're still underplaying the issue. So this is a crisis that's affecting the livability of our planet for humans, and it's going to have repercussions that are economic and financial, as well as emotional, social repercussions we can't live with, we won't want to live with. So everything we do about increasing environmental initiatives is really important. And in this place, we're looking at biodiversity, which is probably, often people say it's the second biggest crisis on the planet. And the Greenbelt has such a role in increasing that. So we're looking at the ways faith communities become the force that moves the private sector and citizens in the biosphere crisis, maybe a different ask than we've had in the past. And so we're looking for an interfaith movement to inform and support a local sustainable community. So I don't think Don's here. I'll try to send an email to him. So I'm going to go right to Margaret and introduce her, and we'll see if Don can come in later. So Margaret, we're really glad you're here. She has a Bachelor of Ed in Adult Education and a BA of Psychology from Brock University. She's been the Director of Communications and Operations in the corporate education sector and the Communications Director for the Midhurst Ratepayers Association. But we're really asked her to be here today as her having founded the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition with Sandy Agnew and 15 like-minded groups. So Margaret, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Esther. This is a really good, I'm happy to be here. This is a really good example of a key spot in the Greenbelt. You can see the farmland in the back. There's water resources, forests. Not all of the Greenbelt is pristine and without development, that's for sure. But I wanted to show people what some of the beautiful parts of the Greenbelt look like, and why so many people are looking to defend it and expand it. Next slide, please. So a little bit about us. Yes, we started way back when in 2016, 2017 when we got incorporated. Now those 15 groups have grown to 40 groups, over 40 groups, about 46 groups across Simcoe County. We have a few provincial organizations as well. It does include faith-based organizations. It does include some farmer organizations, naturalist clubs, ratepayer groups, climate activists. It's some social justice groups. And the idea is that if you have a regional network that's all committed to the similar values of what they want to see in their communities, that can increase community power and community voice. And we can use that to help build the world that we want to see. So we want to see healthy, equitable communities, protected green spaces, local climate leadership, of course, access to clean water and local food. And that's been going really well. We sit on tables at the provincial organizing level, like the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance, Yours to Protect, the Greenbelt Promise, and we also help coordinate efforts locally. So we do a little bit of everything, and the idea is all focused on building community power and refining community voice. Next slide. So some of you may know of the Greenbelt, but may not know much about it. So I'll give you a very brief history, some facts. Ontario's Greenbelt is the largest Greenbelt in the world. It's about 2 million acres. There are 3 components to the Greenbelt. The Niagara Escarpment, which you can see runs kind of north-south there, and goes down to Niagara Falls on the southern edge of Lake Ontario. There is the Oak Ridges Moraine, which is that green, the lighter green in the middle, just north of GTA. And then the darker green is what they call the protected countryside. And so the three components together are what makes up Ontario's Greenbelt. The idea was that since the Oak Ridges Moraine and the Niagara Escarpment are so integral to our ecosystems, to biodiversity, to water provision, climate, all those sort of things, that really those were so important that we needed to look for buffers to make sure that they were even better protected than they are. In that protected countryside, you're going to have farmland, wetlands. They're going to have settlements in there as well. So there are some communities that are within the Greenbelt, which are represented in kind of the brownie dots. And really, the Greenbelt is one of the best legally, or at least it was one of the best legally protected Greenbelts in the world. There's also local Greenbelts. We have one in Waterloo and one in Ottawa. Those aren't a part of the official Greenbelt. But what's important to know here is that because the Greenbelt is comprised really of three unique systems, the plans and the legislations that recognize the Niagara Escarpment, for example, in the Oak Ridges Moraine, were conservative initiatives. The protected countryside, the green, was a liberal initiative. And since its inception in 2005, it has been supported by successive governments. So even though the Greenbelt has become political now, it was started with really, without having the partisanship there. It was really about successive governments seeing that they wanted to have a legacy going forward. Next slide. Oh, I think you missed one. Back one? No? Okay. So what are the biggest threats to Ontario's Greenbelt? Well, as I mentioned, oh yeah, there we go. I was gonna say, I think there was another slide in there. So some people may be thinking Greenbelt and farmland, and it does all of those wonderful things. So I'm not going to read them out to you, but you can see how much ecosystem services. So basically, they take scientists, they estimate a dollar value of what it would cost to replicate those systems if we were to use, gray infrastructure, wastewater treatment plants, and that sort of stuff. How much would it cost us? And then, so what is the dollar equivalent of what the Greenbelt provides for our economy and saves us some money? So you can see we're in the hundreds of millions of dollars for flood control. Oh, sorry, I'm not touching it. There we go. So we're in the hundreds of millions of dollars for flood control and averted damage costs. And then when we get further down, we're talking about millions of tons of carbon that are stored in the Greenbelt through the wetlands and through the forests and farmland. And then an additional 200,000 tons are sequestered each year of carbon. And you might go, well, what does that actually work out to be? How much is that? So that's equivalent to taking 19 million cars off the road for 1 year. Canada has roughly about 26 million cars registered. So that is really important for climate change. So this is why the IPCC talks about when we're dealing with climate change, one of the best things that we can do is rehabilitate and protect green spaces, because not only do they avert us from the climate impacts, so it helps us mitigate the things that that climate's going to bring, it also helps us adapt. So we can store carbon, and plus the wetlands will help us control floods, those sort of things. So it's not just a nice thing to have. Increasingly, as climate becomes worse, Greenbelt and similar protected green space are going to be our lifeline. And so it's really important, as the IPCC report says, that we protect every kind of inch of nature we have left and rehabilitate and get more green spaces that we can. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to apologize. I was trying to phone Dawn and things were getting really confusing. I'm back with you.
Okay. All right. So what are the biggest threats to Ontario's Greenbelt? Politics for the last little while has been the biggest threat. As I said, the Greenbelt was not a partisan initiative. It was started, components of it were started by conservatives, supported by NDP, supported by liberals. It has been built on by successive governments that saw it as pan-partisan. It was not a partisan issue. You may famously remember when Doug Ford got into power, he promised he wasn't going to touch the Greenbelt. We have now gone through almost 6 years of the Greenbelt becoming blamed for housing issues, for affordability. It's been cheapened to highlighters and crayons, that's how it was created. It has been criticized as something that's not necessary anymore. All of these things are patently false. The Greenbelt is, again, supported by science. It's supported by ecologists. The way that it was created and the way that it was implemented was never perfect. I mean, I don't know if a government does anything perfectly, especially when it's a big project, but there is value in what is in the Greenbelt. And so to take it into a political area and turn it into something that denigrates it and cheapens it is really the attempt of trying to remove a legacy that we will absolutely need as climate impacts worsen. That politics is not just about whether they value the Greenbelt or not, but what they see the Greenbelt being used for. And Mayor David Crombie is a friend of mine, former mayor of Toronto, also a former Conservative MP. And he said to me a long time ago, we see green space as space with potential. We see it as it doesn't have a function yet until we assign it a function with a building or with a road or something else. And that's with, if you speak to Indigenous elders, they have a very clear understanding that those green spaces already provide a function. They already provide homes and water for living creatures and for us. So what has happened is this kind of narrative has been built that the Greenbelt's really not that important. And instead of having a non-function like the farmland and the wetlands and the ecosystems that it preserves, we should be using it for sprawl or housing development everywhere and for highways. And the reason why so many people are upset, and it comes with that, is aggregate is the third one, because there's a lot of mining activity that happens on the Greenbelt. And the more that we continue to build housing and highways in the Greenbelt, the more places that are close nearby that'll be the source of that aggregate. So it becomes a really cheap political tool to say we have such a big problem, we need to destroy something. And I'm sure Franz might be saying more about this, so I won't want to steal your thunder, Franz, but there has been credible planners, even the province's own reports that say the Greenbelt is not necessary to build the type of housing we want. So when you start paving things over, you cannot just replace it. For example, farmland is roughly anywhere they've estimated 1 to 2 centuries, so 100 to 200 years it takes of a natural process to be able to have the stratification of soil that is suitable for growing crops. And that does not just get built. As I said, it's a process that happens over centuries, not over 20 years. So these are these types of things that when we destroy something such as the Greenbelt and other green places around it, it is not replicated. It is not something that can be shifted. We can't just build wetlands wherever we want to. We can't just put farmland wherever we want to. It is a finite resource. And so those are the biggest threats, and groups like mine and others are really trying to get Ontarians back in touch with there is a value to having clean water, food, clean air, and our natural spaces have to be set aside, and we have to figure out other alternatives to getting each other around and building communities, because the way that we're going, especially under this current political climate, is that green space isn't important, and we'll deal with the impacts of what we've destroyed once we get to a certain point. Sometimes that happens when we get into this kind of scarcity mindset, and it's really well documented that you say, what we're going to do right now is focus on the immediate problem, and we're going to break everything around it, knowing that once the immediate problem's fixed, then we can go back and look at the damage we've created. And unfortunately, we have a changing climate that's not making it a predictable 10 or 20, 30, 40 years that we can now say, okay, well, we broke all of our ecosystems, we broke all of our tributaries and water systems, now we can fix it. That may not be the chance. So this really is, it's not an economy or the environment, it's not housing or the environment. We have to do them both well, and we can't sacrifice one for the other. Next slide, please. And so this just to highlight this, Jennifer Keesmaat used to be the former planner in the city of Toronto. She did her and the best minds, and Lisa Raitt, who was a former Conservative MP, created this task force on housing and climate. And they emphasized that the #1 factor for building affordable, low carbon and resilient homes is where they're built. If we continue to build them in places that we know we're going to need to provide us with food and water, protect endangered species, that sort of thing, not only are we creating communities that are more expensive, we are taking away the lifeblood, literally, of communities now and into the future. So this is not some fringe idea that there's a co-benefit to housing, climate, and environmental protection. They are related, and they should be treated as such because they co-benefit one another. Next slide, please. So you may be thinking, what am I supposed to do about that? How does that work? I think when people have a network or have a community, so it might be your congregation, that might be a book club, it might be a Bible study group or whatever, you have to look at two things. Where is your power most concentrated, and who has the power to change things? I think what's happened, especially in politics in the last little bit, people have felt that power is always power over. And so there are groups and parts of society that feel, I don't want anything to do with power because it's abusive, it's exploitive. And I had a mentor a while, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, talk to me about power with and power for. And so it's not about enacting your community's power to feel superior or to feed your ego. It's really to say, we have community power and community voice that can be used to help people that don't have as much power, that can be used to give voice to things that don't have that voice. So your power is going to be most concentrated in the networks you've already established, people that share similar values, and people that trust you. People that if you said to them, hey, this is a really good book, they would say, oh, I'm open to that idea. Usually that's going to be in your local community. It's also going to be your power is going to be most concentrated in local politics or with your local MPP, because chances are you share maybe the same community center, you go to the same grocery store, you know the same places. There is a relationship there, even if you don't know them personally. They're much easier to access, especially local politicians, and they're easier to make an impact with. Then you have to go, and so there's a political angle to it. There's also a community angle. Where else can you see who has the power to change things, which is why we tend to go to politics, because provincial and local politics is where we're making these decisions mostly, where housing gets built, what type of housing gets built, what type of climate change plans we have, what are the rules to protect wetlands, what are the rules to protect our lakes and waters. Those are all like mostly provincial initiatives, and they filter down to the municipalities. But also one thing I didn't include in here is, if you look historically at social justice movements, civil society, there is a power when you congregate with others. So look for ways that your power can be amplified by others, which is why we did a coalition, because the idea is you have one small ratepayers group in the middle of nowhere who isn't being taken very seriously, but you have the full weight of 45 associations around you who are sharing, who support you, who can say like, this is, we also agree with this. That makes it a lot different. So look for ways to think about how you can use your power for and power with. Try to forget the fact that there is abusive power that exists, and that you don't want to replicate that. And then look to see who has the power to change the things, and figure out what types of ways your community would like to enact their power, because you inherently have it. Next slide. And so here's some, breaking that down a little further. It could be information sessions like these. It could be connecting with local groups that are already doing the work. Maybe you can offer them meeting space or low-cost space to hold their events, support their efforts by sharing kind of upcoming events that they have or calls to action. Organize letter writing campaigns to officials, to the newspaper about a particular issue or about something that concerns you. We have a do-it-yourself actions with support files. So in there, we have a collection of, how to do a phone zap. Well, maybe you've never done a phone zap before. That's okay. We've included some slides that you can look at. We've included a how-to. Maybe it's a march. Maybe, there's different things that you can look into to do the support files and take from that as you will. They're not perfect. They're not supposed to be done exactly like this, but at least it gives you some idea of where you need to go. And then just the final underscore about recognizing the power of your voice and your community's voice. Do not take for granted the amount of influence your community has. And Margaret Mead has a quote, which I'm going to probably not get exactly right, but never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it's the only thing that ever has. And when we look at whether it be the Greenbelt or the Lakes and Protection Act, or we look at climate change plans, whatever wonderful thing you see, a law that you see that you go, wow, that was a really good law. Know that at the root of it were people that were in their community who said, this is no longer good enough. And we're going to organize and we're going to work together to make sure that this gets passed. So sure, in the end, it becomes like, that's a conservative initiative, that was a liberal initiative, that was an NDP thing, that was my local mayor. But I can guarantee you with almost 100% certainty, it always started with one or two or a group of people who got together and said, we need to figure out how to influence the people in power to do the right thing. That is how I know most of our laws have been created, if not all of them. For better or for worse. Next slide, please. So that is all of it. I think I'm right on time too, so this is good. Feel free to contact me, look into us, and if you're looking for people that are in your area, we don't know everybody, but I'm sure we can probably help you connect. It's really past the time for us sitting on our hands and wondering what to do. It's doing something is what's needed, even if it's not perfect and even if you're not entirely sure. The will to take action is kind of what's needed now. So thank you for your time.
I am unmuted now, right? Yes. Thank you so much. I actually went back to this slide because a lot of the things that are here are the things that we are also calling on faith communities to do. It's the same for the other climate initiatives that we're calling for as well. And the fact that faith communities have a building and they have space, they know how to run meetings, like a lot of that is excellent. So very applicable. And I think that Franz, our next speaker, is also somebody who can really help us with that, how the key way to communicate together with other groups of letter writing. And so I just want to introduce Franz. He has a PhD in urban environmental policy from York University, worked for City Councillor Jack Layton, that is so cool, as an environmental advisor, and now the executive director of the Toronto Environmental Alliance and the chair of the Ontario Greenbelt Alliance, and then its coordinator in 2020. But he's really working for us, and the reason we asked him to come is that this Alliance for a Livable Ontario, which is this year-old network of groups and individuals that's growing so much, and it's focused on advocating a set of policies that simultaneously solve the housing crisis and protect farmland and natural areas. So Franz, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, I am no longer the executive director of the Toronto Environmental Alliance.
As I said that, I thought, no, yeah. I didn't do that correctly.
So yeah, next slide, please. I think one of the questions that we may just want to spend a moment touching on is the connection between housing in the Greenbelt and climate action. And I want to quote Sharice Burda, who's the executive director of the City Building Institute at the Toronto Metropolitan University, a very wise person who's written a lot on this. She wrote in a blog that was published a couple of days ago, "Where we build is fundamental to getting housing right. In fact, the International Panel on Climate Change's most recent assessment report cites that spatial and land use planning offers high potential to address most of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and offers the greatest strategy to reduce GHG emissions from transportation." So how we build our cities and how we build the spaces we live in have a huge impact on the climate crisis. Next slide, please. At a very, very high level, there've kind of been two different approaches to city building. And when I came across this, another person used it in a presentation, I thought, this is brilliant. The one approach is Barcelona and kind of Europe. And you see, this is a scale drawing. 2.8 million people in 1990 took up about 162 square kilometers of land, versus Atlanta and most North American countries and cities. Less people live in dramatically greater amounts of space. And these are kind of the two approaches. Next slide, please. For decades in Southern Ontario, we've been pushing the suburban sprawl approach. And that's because land speculators, developers make a huge amount of money off of that. And most government planning rules have made it easy to push suburban sprawl. We've developed a huge industry that benefits from suburban sprawl, and they're working, and they've been very successful at getting provincial and even local governments to support suburban sprawl with government planning rules. Next slide, please. Thankfully, and one of the reasons that the Greenbelt was created was that there was a push, probably starting in the 1990s, late 90s, towards saying, we can't keep sprawling. We have to do things better. At the same time, we've got to fit more people in. And so the thinking was, well, let's start building within existing towns and cities through density and doing it in a way that is sustainable and reduces carbon emissions. And one of the wonderful things is that if you do increase density, you can actually reap huge number of carbon benefits and also other ecological benefits. So that framing and that way of thinking became increasingly dominant and was one of the key forces behind the establishment of the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt essentially became no-go land that could not be developed, and the province said, okay, so push instead intensification in existing towns and cities. And that's where the struggle has been that Margaret has talked about. The suburban sprawl types, they keep on saying, no, we can't do that. We have to build more sprawl. Next slide, please. And so what we see is this fight between two competing visions. And we heard Premier Ford just last year, prior to his big Greenbelt reversal, saying, well, everybody wants a white picket fence. Well, some people do, many don't. Many want to live in sustainable communities where there's much higher density, and having a white picket fence and having a garage and having a backyard is not as important as being in a town and a place where you can live sustainably. Next slide, please. So one thing that we have realized, and I think a lot of people realize, is that the pro-sprawl side, they claim that we don't have enough land available for building all the housing we need. And they suggest that we have to sacrifice important, sorry, go back to that slide, please. We have to sacrifice important environmental protections in order to address the housing crisis. They've set it up as an either or. However, the evidence makes it completely clear that they are wrong. Report after report has shown we have more than enough land already set aside to build all the housing we need, full stop. We don't need to go into the Greenbelt, nor do we actually need to build on land that's already been, much of the land that's already been set aside for development, natural areas and green space, doesn't have to be touched. Instead, we have to focus on existing towns and cities. Next slide, please. The good news is we can stop sprawl. We can build sustainable communities that are climate resilient. We can protect our farmland, which is an increasingly important source of food. We can protect wetlands and natural areas, and we can do it in a way that solves the housing crisis in the fastest, most effective way. Next slide, please. And this is why we created the Alliance for Livable Ontario. It's an alliance of people and groups representing hundreds of thousands of Ontarians from many different sectors. We have farming organizations represented, land use planners, we have environmentalists, we have housing activists, tenant activists, we have lawyers, we have developers. We all came together to build a livable Ontario and to stop the provincial government policies that are falsely claiming that they're solving this housing crisis facing us, but in fact, what they're doing is harming our communities and undermining the protection of farmland, natural areas, and democratic institutions. Next slide, please. And we essentially have kind of a 5-point platform. The first is that we want to build a future where we're welcoming a growing population accommodated through government, private sector, nonprofit, cooperative, and charitable partnerships that build and protect affordable mixed-use housing situated within communities that offer a variety of transportation options. We want communities that are vibrant, healthy, affordable, climate resilient, and surrounded by permanently protected farmland and natural areas. And we want provincial and municipal governments that are real partners and that make planning and infrastructure and housing decisions that build sustainable, healthy communities. We don't need more division, we need more cooperation. Next slide, please. And the final two is we want all political parties to reflect our agenda in their party platforms. And fifth, all political parties uphold democratic principles as well as practical public consultation, engagement, and transparency. We are fiercely nonpartisan. We invite and want people from all political stripes to join us. And how we're making change happen is that we're building a collaborative and inclusive alliance of all the different groups and individuals. We're communicating our message broadly. We're inspiring leadership from across sectors, including unions and others to champion our agenda. And we've got a multi-year plan to ensure that our actions actually lead to the future. We're a space where people can come together and not just firefight, put out the fights and put out the fires that have been created by bad provincial policy, but also to plan in the future. Final slide, please. So I invite you to join us. I invite you to visit us at livableontario.ca. And if you like what we're doing, please become a member. And by becoming a member, you get onto our mailing list and join with the thousands of others to help us build a livable Ontario. Thank you.
You're welcome. I just think that I'd really like it that we all join, and also I'm thinking that there might be other ways that we figure out how to share this information, Franz, because I think it's so important, and this provides the means to do what Margaret's talking about, I think, and it's trying to figure out the best way to get this information out to as many people as possible, and I think many of the faith communities would really be willing to support that. And so even though there are a few here today, we're really hoping more watch this video, and also that we will try to figure out other ways to share this information amongst our faith communities. And I really appreciate you coming. You have to leave, I think, now, right? So I don't want to thank you so much for your time. And if anyone sends me a question I can't answer, I'll forward it to you.
Great.
But I really appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and best of luck to everyone. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. I don't think Aaron is here yet, and I'm not sure what happened there too, but I know Don is coming, and so he'll be here in about 5 minutes. So I just wondered if anyone has questions about now, or anything else we can explore before we go on, and possibly Aaron will come in later. Maybe we should go to her YouTube and blog if we're waiting for as well. Don't have a question off the top of my head for you, Margaret, but what are you thinking about what Franz is saying and how to sort of link these things? I think you're muted.
I think it's what we've been talking about for a pretty long time, is that there was always this false dichotomy of, it's the environment versus something, right? It's the environment versus our economy was the most common one. And what we've learned is that the ecosystem is at the base of our community, and we have to start looking maybe at the social determinants of health. So those social determinants of health, housing, poverty, clean water, clean air, and there's others, really have to form the basis of what we do, which means all of those social determinants of health can be things that we can advocate for together because they all benefit one another. So, you know, Franz and I have known each other for a really long time. We're a member of ALO. I think we all are singing from the same songbook, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I understand, and I think Jennifer too, you can speak to this a little bit, but that Toronto is actually inquiring of faith communities whether they could use some of their land to plant trees on, because Toronto has a really strong desire to increase its urban trees, and so does Richmond Hill, where I live. I'm not sure if the other municipalities are really looking for that, but I'm thinking this is just a little way to join in that sort of desire to increase biodiversity. Anyone else? Margaret, did you want to ask a question?
I was just going to say that as far as land, I don't know if anybody's been in touch with the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, but the aging crisis is also upon us, right? And
Right.
so they've been reaching out to churches, and maybe some of the churches in your network have been approached about building housing that would enable seniors or others to come in. They kind of pitch it as it's a co-benefit because it provides some income for the church, but also helps house people. And one of the things that people don't really appreciate is that, you know, you've got the climate mitigation and climate adaptation. You know, the climate mitigation is going to be things that we can try to slow down or reduce the impacts. The adaptation part is, you know, actions that are going to allow us to adjust to this new reality. And housing is absolutely a climate action because it's going to be women, seniors, and youth, and those that are marginalized groups that are going to be feeling the first impacts of climate. And so, you know, to not think of it like, think of housing as a climate action, think of community building as a climate action,
Right.
Versus sometimes how we're told, like, if you're not doing this, it's not climate action. And the way I look at it is that if you're not figuring out a way to reduce fossil fuels, changing your energy systems, if you're not figuring out a way to protect nature and a way to build healthier communities and in the location you're in, then that's everything else is not climate action. Okay. So it's a broad bucket, but it helps alleviate the pressure of, oh, I should be recycling every day, because that's going to really benefit. And I'm sure it's going to make everybody feel a little better, and it's going to make everyone think like, I'm taking a climate action. But there are more things that need to be done at the cooperative level and the collaborative level than at the individual level. And that's what I really try to impress upon people.
Yeah. And I was actually also, there's another Margaret on here. So I was wondering if Margaret W had a question.
Oh, sorry.
But thank you, Margaret Prophet. That was amazing to hear too. And I wrote down that name.
Oh, that's okay. I was just, this is my first time coming to one of your meetings. I'm a new lay rep from Thornhill United in Toronto. I just wondered how you sort of start up interest in your local church. Is it usually like one person who's an advocate who will start asking people to join them in writing letters and about the Greenbelt and stuff like that? Like what are some of the other churches doing is what I'm asking, I guess.
Well, and one thing I can answer to that is that we held a meeting at our church where we invited the municipal leaders and the federal and the provincial, and just you know, reached out to our local community just to say we were holding this meeting like a town hall, but we had all three levels of government there, and we had about 60 people show up to talk about these kind of issues. And we didn't give the microphone to the government leaders. We gave the microphone to the audience, and we had them ask their questions to the government leaders. So in spite of them knowing that, they still came. Every single level of government came, but it was really, it put us on the map surprisingly. And we became invited to be involved in municipal affairs after that, which was a really surprising thing to me, to be invited for that. But I think it was using the faith community as a space to let the audience talk together and with the movers and shakers in the community about how to make change, and really giving voice to your community, not just to your political leaders, giving them the role of listening was very powerful. We also didn't just do it once, we did it twice, like back to back, once in February, once in March, like a month later. We wanted the conversation to continue. And then if you're going to do it that way, I think you need to make it simple so that you aren't worried about doing it. And so I really urge, keep it simple. Don't try to over imagine how to do it. Just give the date, the time, and they come. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, I was going to say, and of course, volunteer power, like obviously you don't want to do a project that's going to over exhaust your volunteer power, because there's a certain amount of energy in churches, and then there's a certain amount where it's easy to get over ambitious. But if you do start to find a community collecting, I think that the church, kind of like Esther was saying with space, another example that we've seen in Toronto is Beach United is holding an eco fair. So they're inviting many organizations and individuals who are already super involved with environmental work to come into their space, and then they're connecting them and holding some presentations and sort of facilitating a community gathering, and then they have, you know, room for a keynote address and lots of networking and that sort of thing. So just like the town hall, it's another way to sort of invite the community in and all the energy that already exists and connect it with the church.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like being a connecting space. And I think if Erin was here, I don't know, Jennifer, if you have a way of communicating with her, but if she was here, she would talk about the value of this greening her grounds. Like, I think she made a garden, permaculture garden there, project on the lawn. And I think that brought in community members too, who had expertise and interest in working with land. Often our faith communities have more land than the average person in the community. And so they have that land that they're able to work with.
Absolutely. Kimberg Park Garden is now supported still by their minister, Daniel, but otherwise I would say 3/4 of their volunteers are members of the community who are interested in local greening and gardening initiatives, but not necessarily part of the church. So there's a bit of overlap, definitely,
That's what I thought.
but it's become its own energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have a follow-up question, or is that good?
No, that's great. Thank you very much, both of you. That's very
Yes.
good information. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Her YouTube link, Erin's YouTube link. And I think just going and exploring what she has, I was going to listen to her talk,
Okay.
but maybe instead I'll go and watch her blog. And I don't know if Don's here yet. He said he would try to get here at 1:45, but I think he had thought the week was next week for some reason. So I suspect he's in a meeting. He's trying to get out of it. So I wanted to just speak to biodiversity, which is what I'd asked him to really research. I didn't research on this, but I think we often misunderstand the interconnectedness. And when Margaret was talking about the value of the green spaces, and this is something that as a science person, I really understand how critical it is to have the natural spaces in our areas, because we don't understand the connections about how water's cleaned and how air is recycled. And I think of these politicians making these judgments, and I want to take them back to grade 6, 7 and say, did you listen? You must have failed these classes to not understand the critical nature of our planet in recycling our compounds. And they are judging that we need 30 to 50% of our planet to be made untouched by humans to allow our planet to be working properly for us, in terms of recycling our air to make it clean and usable, full of oxygen again, to keep our water clean, to keep our food stocks working. So many of our agricultural plants need the bees to pollinate them, need insects and worms to break things down and to aerate soil. And we don't understand the role all these things play. And that's why their guess is 30 to 50%. We're in the largest species loss. One of the it will end up being the biggest species lost. I think there was a huge fall off back when the dinosaurs all disappeared, but but that was over a much longer time frame than our species loss right now, which is basically from humans taking over the planet. So in terms of creating space for biodiversity, our faith communities become spaces where we can do that. And it's creating a little naturalized area is potentially a big role in allowing those species to come back. And John, how do you feel? Are you breathing? Don's just arrived, so I'll turn it over to him, back to him. But hey, I'm gonna go. This is gonna take me a while, not too long.
Sorry about that, Esther. I sincerely apologize. It was
It's okay.
one of those things, and then I realized that I thought there was a link to it, but it was a link to the agenda next week. And anyway,
Oh,
so
I should have sent you the link, but I couldn't do it because I was barely able to call you.
Anyway, so thank you everyone for your patience. I have a brief presentation here.
So are you a co-host? You may need to be made a co-host.
No, I think I can share.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Here we go. Can you see now?
Yep.
Okay, what happens when I start this? Whoops. There we go. Just me. So thank you for your patience. I have an interesting little presentation that I call Biodiversity, Orangutans, and Palm Oil. They may not seem related and not as applicable to us here, but actually some of the messages here are directly applicable to how we behave and what we can do here in Southern Ontario. Well, first off, a little bit about conservation authorities and what I do, and biodiversity and why it's important. And then a little bit about palm oil, because this has been in the news a little bit on and off as a good example of kind of indirect impacts that we don't normally think of necessarily. And some of the challenges we face and what we can do about it. So the two images on the screen here, one is a long-eared owl, and this is the place I just came from, ironically. There was one there last week, and they need little homes to roost during the winter. They don't necessarily nest in the city here, but they need places to roost in the winter. And then the other is a black-throated green warbler that needs a variety of habitats. It spends its winters down in the Caribbean and further south, and then comes up to our forests north of Toronto to spend its summers. So these are two examples of species that need a variety of different homes and habitats during their life cycle. So that's me. I'm a hydrogeologist, and hydro meaning water and geologist meaning earth. And my degree is in earth science. And I've spent 15 years as an environmental consultant in the private sector. And now, actually, haven't updated this one, 22 years at the Toronto Region Conservation Authority this year. And I enjoy getting outside as much as I can, including camping with my scouts and outdoor recreation, fishing, photography, and woodworking, all of which, again, requires biodiversity. When you think about it, because when we're out in nature, we want to see a variety of things as opposed to looking and seeing one species of tree or simply manicured lawns. And if you go fishing, ideally you want to see more than one kind of fish. And that's important for our ecosystems as well. And then, of course, photography. I love taking pictures of all the diversity we have out there. And in my woodworking, I use a variety of woods salvaged from various hazard trees and urban trees that have been removed. And again, we can make use of wood a lot around our homes in terms of furnishings and decor. So what is the Toronto Region Conservation Authority? Many of you have probably heard about us. We're one of 36 conservation authorities in Ontario. We are watershed based. 2506, I always think 2,400 square kilometers. This number is a little bigger. A lot of jurisdiction that we cover, including 9 watersheds, the Humber being the largest for us. And we own about 16,000 hectares of land in the GTA. We're actually the largest single landholder in the GTA, which again helps protect biodiversity. We own 19 parks, some in partnership or operated in partnership with others, like the City of Toronto or the City of Markham. We also do flood warning and protection, still under the recent regulations that have just been put out. Flood warning and protection is still something that's key to what we do. And we also have a strong education team helping educate both young people and adults as well in terms of environmental stewardship. We even teach courses in solar panels and solar panel installation, renewable energy. And we also do a lot of environmental monitoring, both in terms of water quality, surface water quality, groundwater quality, fish. We sample the fish in Lake Ontario to see if they are safe to eat, which I'm proud to say that they now are, and we couldn't say that a few years ago. So, what is biodiversity? Well, bio means all those living things such as trees and flowers, birds and mammals. And diversity means many forms. So here we have one of our, what we call our celebrity owls that showed up in Schaumburg, Ontario. It's a hawk owl, normally found in the boreal forest. So we don't normally see this cute little guy, but he entertained the people of Schaumburg and many people who came from around Ontario to come and see him. And that diversity is appealing to us as people, but it's also really important for the environment because each one of these species fills a special niche in the environment. And if you take them away, your whole pyramid can collapse. So it's really important that we have a wide variety of species. A good example is ash trees. Not sure if that is an ash tree in the picture, but everybody's probably heard of the emerald ash borer. And it happened in the good old days. Municipalities planted lots and lots and lots of ash trees because they grow really well in the urban environment. They're urban tolerant, they grow fast, they look pretty. So that was the standard tree to plant. Well, along came the emerald ash borer from China, and our trees weren't adapted to this particular species. And the result is it's wiped out probably 90% of the ash trees in Southern Ontario. And what does that mean? Well, all of a sudden municipalities are going, well, that didn't work. But now it's going to take 30, 40 years to grow new trees. Like we can plant new trees, and municipalities are planting a wider variety of trees now, recognizing that when they planted all ash trees and they all died, A, they became hazards and started falling. And B, when you look at a forest and it's all dead, it's not very appealing. It's not good for the natural environment or for the aesthetics that we enjoy. So a number of countries are establishing goals and placing values on ecosystems and biodiversity, including Canada. So a little bit, what do I do? I'm not a biologist, as I mentioned. My role is reviewing land development projects for trying to build the homes that we need to serve the people coming to Ontario. And that includes subdivisions and all the infrastructure that goes along with it, including roads and bridges and sewers and water main. And I also, the main goal is to protect the sources of drinking water for the people and for the natural environment, again, to promote biodiversity, because some species require cool or cold water to survive, and we want those species as well as the warm water species that live in our jurisdiction. And we have to protect those sources of water for them as well. And again, we work on a watershed basis. So I sometimes don't know my municipal boundaries very well, but I certainly know where my watershed boundaries are. And a little bit about why biodiversity matters. Well, if you look around, that's a beaver pond from my cottage area up in Parry Sound. That simple beaver pond provides food for, in the cases of ducks, 2 species of ducks, hooded merganser and wood duck, both nest in that little beaver pond. And they need it for food, they need it for water, for shelter. Recreation, we can canoe in these biodiverse areas and see different species, as I mentioned. I've seen beaver, otter, 3 types of turtles in this one pond. So that means when you see that diversity, you mean that you can see that ecosystem is healthy and sustainable in the long term. And biodiversity can also provide us with material for wood for our homes and now for our offices. The lower picture is harvesting a dead tree that fell across a road, and that tree was turned into lumber to build a gazebo at my cottage. So an example of making use of the wood that's available as opposed to clear cutting another forest somewhere else, but getting locally sourced wood. And a key thing about these healthy ecosystems, they help clean our air and our water, and we need both of those to survive. And it also fits in with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are examples from Hong Kong, the Kellett School, and you can see that over 40,000 species are at risk of extinction over the coming decades. That's a staggering number. And United Nations came up with this goal 15 to protect and restore terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage our forests, manage desertification, and halt the land degradation and stop the biodiversity loss. So I thought I'd show that, it's not just us here in Canada. This school that I did a presentation to in Hong Kong, they've been working on the UN sustainability goals in their area and looking at what they can do. And then we have the bad news. And when you look at how much land that we manage, 100 million hectares of forest was lost between 2000 and 2020, or equivalent to about the land area of Egypt. And a lot of that forest loss is for agriculture. And a year or so ago, I went to a presentation from someone, professor that I studied with at University of Waterloo, looking at what he calls virtual water. And what's happening, if you look at the packages of strawberries and blueberries and whatever off-season fruit you get at the grocery store, you look at where they come from. They come from a lot of places that don't have a lot of water, including the Central Valley in California, in Mexico, South America, Africa in some cases. And what they're doing, a lot of those things, a strawberry, for example, is about 90% water. So what they're doing is they're shipping their water that maintains their ecosystems, and they're shipping it in the form of those strawberries and the fruit and vegetables to us here in Ontario. So that loss is almost more important, or is more important, I would argue, than the water in Southern Ontario that we have lots of, that people are losing their forests, they're losing their biodiversity, so that we can have fresh fruit anytime we want. Anyway, so there is some good news. I like to tell people, I don't like to end on a sour note, but to say worldwide, there's proportion of forests with long-term management plans. So these are people planning their forests saying, yes, we can cut down some trees and manage our forests and grow them better and more sustainably, increased to about 58%, which, we're getting there. And 700 million hectares were protected in 2020. I know some of these are older stats, but the most recent I could lay my hands on. So this is where palm oil comes in. And here's just one example of what we can do. And it's not what you might typically think of, but these tropical rainforests support about 2/3 of the world's biodiversity. And as it happens, palm oil is one of the most, I would say, efficient crops to grow, if you will, in terms of producing food from a given area. The problem is you can see a biodiverse rainforest up above, and then you have a palm plantation. And you see the great difference in biodiversity. The understory is non-existent, essentially. You've got some grass, and then you've got palm trees. So originally, oil palms were from West Africa. Now they're growing them in a lot of different places. So they cut down the native rainforest and plant palm trees and then harvest the oil. So this is what it starts to look like on the landscape. You get these landscapes that were totally natural. And yes, it's green, but it's now essentially a monoculture. And obviously the creatures and everything, the butterflies, the insects, all the little animals, all the way up to the higher carnivores and apex predators, they can't survive necessarily in this environment. It's no longer suitable habitat for them. So why all this palm oil all of a sudden? Well, it turns out unfortunately, it's great. In terms of its utility in a wide variety of products. Until I looked at this, I'd never realized all the places that we use palm oil. Margarine's a big one, cooking oil, candy, chocolate, ice cream, detergents, soap, shampoos, pretty well almost everything, all the way up to industrial lubricant. So very handy product. But what's the impact? So now, the way it is now, although the oil palms originally came, in this case, from West Africa, 95% of them are now in Indonesia and Malaysia. So what they do, they cut down the forests or burn them or both. And that leads to soil erosion and water pollution and obviously less carbon storage because you have that very dense tropical rainforest that's replaced by essentially a farm. And where does it all go? Well, a lot of it, 1.6 million tons to the United States, but also European Union that is even greater at 8.5 million metric tons. So it's amazing where it all goes around the world, all from limited areas in Malaysia and Indonesia. And this is where orangutans come in. As it happens, orangutans are native to Malaysia and Indonesia. Well, and they need a rainforest. They can't, the trees they need to live in, as they're a totally tree-living species, they need that rainforest for everything in their life cycle, their food, their shelter, where they raise their babies. So now it creates a conflict because the orangutans don't have places to live anymore, and they conflict with the palm oil farmers. And this gives you an idea of where they've been, where they were in orange and where they are now. And there are 3 species that are found in Indonesia. And you can see that especially the Tampanuli, there's only 600 of them left. And they live a long time, almost similar, close to human at 35, 45 years. And they are the largest tree dwelling animal, very intelligent. And they actually stay with their parents a long time, not unlike our children. So, as I mentioned, here are some challenges. Well, they eat the farmers' crops, because once you take away their trees, they have to eat something. And the palm oil plantations really are not suitable habitat for orangutans, so they don't have a habitat anymore. And they're also very cute. So people collect them for the pet trade, unfortunately. And then habitat is also lost to mining and forestry, and as well hydroelectric projects that flood the lowland rainforest that they live in. So it's a number of things that interfere with them in this case. So what can we do? Well, I challenged people to try and look around to see what you're consuming that has palm oil in it. Maybe you can cut back a little bit. Support the orangutans and the various rescue centers that help them. And I'm not saying we can eliminate palm oil, but if we can reduce it, we can do our little part. And this is just one example of what we can do. I mentioned others in terms of out of season fruits and vegetables. I know they're important. Maybe we can have some frozen ones that came from Ontario as opposed to ones that came all the way from Mexico, California, South America. And that's it. I'm available for any questions.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
It's not exactly about your presentation,
Sure.
but it is about biodiversity.
Sure.
I live in the Kawartha Lakes region, although
Yes.
I attend church on Zoom every Sunday in Toronto. And I, in a forested area near a provincial park, and I wanted to put some trees in on our property where an ash tree had died a number of years ago and been removed. So I went to a local nursery and asked them for trees that would be good for the next 40 or 50 years or 100 years because our climate is changing. And they
Yes.
sold me 3 tamarisk trees, which I'd never heard of before. And I got home and planted them, and then I read about them. And I dug them up and threw them in the garbage and, lost my investment. But I just wondered, are they becoming, they're actually an invasive species in British Columbia, and they salt the earth, is what it said in what I read. And I thought, is this something that's becoming more popular in Ontario, or is this just some crazy person in Kawartha Lake selling them?
Well, it may be the latter.
Okay.
I can put this over. My son is a biologist with the Conservation Authority, and his specialty is native species. I will say that it's hard to get native species, but I can certainly, I have access to, well, through my son, I can get a list of native plant nurseries that we recommend.
Okay, that would be great.
That it is true. I didn't talk a lot about climate change here, but what some places are doing, Conservation Halton, that I'm also involved in in a volunteer capacity, they're doing some experiments now with planting 2 climate zones south, I call it. So what they do is they look for native plants, not the tamarisk comes from Eurasia and Africa. So I usually that's not something I would generally recommend. But there are native species that are coming north. I'll give you some examples. We've got a tulip tree in our front yard here in Brampton that we planted. The tulip tree is a Carolinian species that normally wouldn't do well. Here, even in Brampton, we're at the fringe of the Carolinian zone. So that's an example of a Carolinian species. That's a native species that will tolerate much warmer temperatures than we've got here. In terms of trees, there's ones like the shagbark hickory, the redbud is another beautiful tree, especially in the early spring. It's one of my son's favorites. It's a Carolinian species. It is available in some nurseries. You might have to go a little further southwestern Ontario to get it or order it.
Okay.
It's a smaller species. Like the others I've told you are quite large. But following this presentation, I can reach out to my son with names and numbers for people with native plants.
Thank you very much.
I know my son is trying to start a business in native plant nurseries because he's been upset with people recommending stuff that saying they're native and they're not, they're cultivars.
Yeah. Or
recommending things like a tamarisk tree, which we laugh about it and go, well, and I admittedly got fooled myself because, again, I'm a geologist, not a biologist. I went out to the store and I bought a maple tree and I thought it was a red maple and didn't have leaves on it. And I'm not good at identifying my maple trees without leaves, especially in a small tree. Well, it was a Norway maple cultivar. So my son cut it down and I replanted the tulip tree that's there now.
Anne, did you have a question? Yeah, go ahead. Muted, Anne. Sorry. There. Good. Oh.
Myself. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you so much for your presentation. All of the presentations have just been amazing. I really appreciate it. I've been writing like crazy, but anyway, I received a write-up yesterday and again this morning from the Narwhal, commenting on the changes to the role of the conservation authorities in Ontario, with a view to their input on development and land projects. And I wonder if you might just speak to us about that from your perspective. I know it's a biggie, but
a touchy subject. I have to watch myself.
I understand. And yeah.
We're still, I have to say, we're still reviewing those. That's been part of my last 2 weeks.
Yep.
I just had a presentation with Conservation Ontario yesterday on interpretation of the new regs. And it's been evolving because they changed the Conservation Authorities Act last year. And this is the second attempt at a new regulation for us here in Ontario. And it does reduce our commenting role. Previously, we commented a lot on ecological works on behalf of municipalities, usually under MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding with the municipalities. So we provided comments to them at their request because they didn't want to hire an ecological team to provide those comments. And for my role as a hydrogeologist, very few lower tier, if any, lower tier municipalities in Ontario have a hydrogeologist on staff. So if they have a groundwater question, and there are groundwater dependent communities in Ontario. If they want to protect them, they need to make sure they have that input. So some of them turn to conservation authorities for that. So some of that has been maintained. We're still looking to see what we can and cannot do. Some of it is there's a reduction in the buffers around wetlands. We used to, previously under the old reg, we had about 100, I believe it was 120 meters. So if somebody was doing something within 120 meters of a wetland, we could comment. Now that number is 30 around all wetlands. I believe it was 120 for provincially significant wetlands. So that's been reduced. Our ability to comment overall on ecological matters, we still can comment on impacts to wetlands. We're still trying to figure out it. Admittedly, we all got this at the same time, the Friday of a long weekend.
Right.
And we've been digesting it over the last 2 weeks. And it's partly why my brain was elsewhere today. Yeah, it significantly changes the timelines. Bill 109 changed the timelines for us on certain applications. So once they're deemed complete, we have very limited time to respond as well, which causes challenges. We typically see in the order of, at TRCA, in the order of 1,000 to 1,500 permits a year, which is a lot to go through. And if the timelines tighten up, then that means with the same resources. And if we don't meet the timelines, then they get some of their money back, some or all. There's a 30-day and 60-day window for that under Bill 109. So there's some effect there. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but over the next, I'm going to say, week or two, because the new regulation comes in, ironically, April 1st, which only essentially gave 30 days for us to adjust.
That's tough.
It is tough because I am part of that review process. Obviously, the division I work in is responsible, has both the planners and the scientists.
And I understand that also the MPP Graydon also he and his office have a veto if they don't like what comes in. Is that correct?
I wouldn't necessarily call it a veto, but what they can do is overrule us. It kind of acts like that, but he's essentially, the minister can step in and grant a permit if we don't. And if the conditions that we put on, like, for example, we may say no grading within the buffer as a condition. And then the client says, well, we need to grade in the buffer in this area. And sometimes they want to grade in all the buffers, in all of the buffer everywhere. And sometimes they just want to touch it a little bit. So we can put conditions that they only grade in, say, 10% of the buffer. So we allow them minimal encroachments. But they can also appeal to the minister if they don't like, if those any conditions that a conservation authority imposes, they don't feel are fair or feasible. They can appeal to the minister, and the minister can review it and essentially override them. It's the same for our regulation. The Conservation Authorities Act. The changes last year introduced some of those. This kind of brings our regulation in line with the Conservation Authorities Act. What we were encountering in between is they changed the Planning Act and the Conservation Authorities Act, but didn't amend our regulation, which gives us the ability to provide permits. So someone could come in with a planning application that we couldn't comment on because it was no longer in our purview. But until this new regulation came in, we couldn't give a permit, right? It could be an activity that we couldn't permit under our old reg, which was 16606, right? Which put everybody in an awkward spot.
Yes.
Because we could tell people, yeah, we don't have any comments at this time, but recognize that this wouldn't likely, we wouldn't likely be able to permit this. And then they, of course, come for the permit. We say, I'm sorry, we can't give you a permit because it doesn't meet 16606. But putting this new regulation, and there's now one regulation for all conservation authorities. So we'll see how that works. There used to be one for every conservation authority, which allowed for local management of specific issues and concerns. So we're not sure how that's going to play out exactly. It's worded very generally, and part of it is going to be, I say, the devil's in the details, right? When
Yes.
how is this going to happen when we start issuing permits starting April 1st?
But you will still be able to issue permits.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we're still able to issue permits. They're trying to primarily focus our activities on I'll say the risk management, flood risk, slope stability, some of those concerns.
Rather than on development issues.
Well, rather than on, I'll say, ecological protection. So that that's the primary they've cut back, but in the hazard management, we've kept a lot of essentially the same authority we had before. So people, if they want to put a building in a floodplain, we can still raise concerns over being in the floodplain and safe access. And our flood warning and protection program is supported under the program. So we haven't totally lost our commenting ability.
We're going to need to wrap up. When
Sorry.
you're watching the
Thank
time.
you very much. Thank
It's
you.
a complicated question.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
stay tuned as things move forward post April 1st. Well, in the next, I'm going to say 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay. We want.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we are hoping to hear from Don again on the 13th. I just switched slides the way I wanted to. So we are hoping that you can do what we asked about, holding a networking meeting in your church on some of these topics. And I just want to point out that we now have funding available to support those initiatives. We haven't created our application form for that, but we will be having funding available if you want to hold a meeting in your faith community to support that initiative. And that'll be coming by the next month. The climate calculator that I posted is a 5-minute test, but I noticed when I took this myself and my friend as well, palm oil shows up very highly in this calculator because the rainforest being cut down plays a big role in climate as well, because the carbon in the rainforest is much greater than the carbon in the palm oil forest. So we've done our networking time. These are our addresses that you can contact us at if you want to get in touch with us about anything that you've seen or heard. And we will be sharing.
In the chat.
Yes, thank you. I will try to do that. Hold on. They'll be saved. But also that, sorry, did you get your picture of that? Also that the slideshow and the chat notes will be shared on the Justice tab and under Ecological Justice, so that you have a chance to look for them there. I'm going to copy and paste these. I can't do this at the same time, but I'm going to try copy. Now I have to go find the chat. There we go. And make sure I'm posting to everyone. Okay.
There's my email in the chat.
Susan's, and this is mine. Oops, now there's not a comment and they're running together. You can't do two things at once. There we go. Should have planned that ahead of time.
No
But
worries.
they are in
And I'll
the
get
chat
my
now.
slides over to you, Esther. And sorry
I
again
just-
for
No,
my
that's fine. And just want to
forgetfulness.
say that we will be meeting again in April. And Don's going to be doing a lot of this conversation, so you can ask him any follow-up questions then as well. Saturday, April 13th, same time, 1 p.m. And this will be on heat pumps and geothermal loops. So, and
Sorry, that again, that's Saturday.
it's April 13th
Okay.
at 1 p.m.
Okay,
And this,
thank you.
this Shining Waters Region website has a justice tab, and we're in there under ecological justice, and the registration link is there.
Great, thank you.
And then in the fall, we're hoping to hold one on financing and grant writing, and sort of divestment and how that plays a role in what we're doing. Thank you. So thank you for coming. Please help us promote this, because I think that's a big issue. We should be able to share this information with a lot more people, and hopefully it being on the website will help.
Thank you very much. This has been really excellent. Thank you. I'm going to have to mute. I have a puppy who has arrived.
No problem. Thanks for coming. Bye.